Chapter 13. Ames Crossing. In the loveliest town of all, where the houses were white and high, and the elm trees were green and higher than the houses, where the front yards were wide and pleasant, and the back yards were bushy and worth finding out about, where the streets sloped down to the stream, and the stream flowed quietly under the bridge, where the lawns ended in orchards, and the orchards ended in fields, and the fields ended in pastures, and the pastures climbed the hill and disappeared over the top toward the wonderful wide sky. In this loveliest of all towns, Stuart stopped to get a drink of sarsaparilla. Parking his car in front of the general store, he stepped out, and the sun felt so good that he sat down on the porch for a few moments to enjoy the feeling of being in a new place on a fine day. This was the most peaceful and beautiful spot he'd found in all his travels. It seemed to him a place he would gladly spend the rest of his life in, if it weren't that he might get homesick for the sights of New York and for his family, Mr. and Mrs. Frederick C. Little and George, and if it weren't for the fact that something deep inside him made him want to find Margalo. After a while, the storekeeper came out to smoke a cigarette, and he joined Stuart on the front steps. He started to offer Stuart a cigarette, but when he noticed how small he was, he changed his mind. "Have you any sarsaparilla in your store?" asked Stuart. "I've got a ruiniest thirst."
"Certainly," said the storekeeper. "Gallons of it. Sarsaparilla, root beer, birch beer, ginger ale, moxie, lemon soda, Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, Dipsy-Cola, Pipsy-Cola, Popsy-Cola, and raspberry cream tonic. Anything you want."
"Let me have a bottle of sarsaparilla, please," said Stuart, "and a paper cup." The storekeeper went back into the store and returned with the drink. He opened the bottle, poured some out into the cup, and set down the cup on the step below. Stuart, who whipped off his cap, lay down on his stomach and dipped up some of the cool, refreshing drink, using his cap as a dipper. "That's very refreshing," remarked Stuart. "There's nothing like a long, cold drink in the heat of the day when you're traveling."
"Are you going far?" asked the storekeeper.
"Perhaps very far," replied Stuart. "I'm looking for a bird named Margalo. You haven't sighted her, have you?"
"Can't say I have," said the storekeeper. "What does she look like?"
"Perfectly beautiful," replied Stuart, wiping the sarsaparilla off his lips with the corner of his sleeve. "She's a remarkable bird. Anybody would notice her. She comes from a place where there are thistles." The storekeeper looked at Stuart closely.
"How tall are you?"
he asked. "You mean in my stocking feet?" said Stuart.
"Yes."
2 inches nothing and a quarter," answered Stuart. "I haven't been measured recently, however. I may have shot up a bit."
"You know," said the storekeeper, thoughtfully, "there's something in town you really ought to meet."
"Who's that?" asked Stuart, yawning.
"Harriet Ames," said the storekeeper. "She's just your size, maybe a trifle shorter, if anything."
"What's she like?" asked Stuart. "Fair, fat, and 40?"
"No. Harriet is young, and she is quite pretty. She's considered one of the best dressed girls in this town, too. All her clothes are tailored specially for her."
"That's so?" remarked Stuart.
"Yes, Harriet's quite a girl. Her people, the Ameses, are rather prominent in this town. One of her ancestors used to be the ferryman here in Revolutionary days. He would carry anybody across the stream. He didn't care whether they were British soldiers or American soldiers, as long as they paid their fare. I guess he did pretty well. Anyway, the Ameses have always had plenty of money. They live in a big house with a lot of servants. I know Harriet would be very much interested to meet you."
"That's very kind of you," replied Stuart. "But I'm not much of a society man these days. Too much on the move. I never stay long anywhere. I blow into a town and blow right out again. Here today, gone tomorrow, a will-o'-the-wisp. The highways and byways are where you'll find me, always looking for Margalo." Sometimes I feel that I'm quite near to her, and that she's just around the turn of the road. Other times I feel that I'll never find her and never hear her voice again. Which reminds me, it's time I was on my way." Stuart paid for his drink, said goodbye to the storekeeper, and drove off. But Ames Crossing seemed like the finest town he had ever known, and before he reached the end of the main street he swerved sharp left, turned off onto a dirt road, and drove down to a quiet spot on the bank of the river. That afternoon he swam and lay on his back on the mossy bank, his hands crossed under his head, his thoughts returning to the conversation he had had with the storekeeper. "Harriet Ames," he murmured. Evening came, and Stuart still lingered by the stream. He ate a light supper of a cheese sandwich and a drink of water, and slept that night in the warm grass with the sound of the stream in his ears.